I'm an IB language and literature student. Today, in this oral, I'll be exploring the global issue of the violence faced by minority communities. To do this, I'll be looking at two different texts which explore this global issue. The first is a song by Akala, who is a British rapper, journalist, author, activist, and poet. His song Fire in the Booth Part 1 was published in 2011. This song explores many different issues through rap, including the issue of the way minority communities are treated. The second text, an article written by Mehdi Hassan, who is a British American political journalist. His article, Life for British Muslims Since 7/7 Abuse, Suspicion, and Constant Apologies, informs the people of the way Muslims have been treated in Britain since the incident of 7/7. In this oral, I'll be exploring the question, how do both texts explore the global issue of violence faced by minority communities? I will be starting off with Akala's Fire in the Booth Part 1, which addresses many different issues through a rap. In a verse depicting the speaker's past experiences, the speaker describes how people were spitting into his pram because he was a coon baby. The lexical choice of coon connotes with racism as it is a derogatory word aimed at black people. The word people refers to the majority, which in this context are the British. The derogatory term highlights how minority communities are viewed by the majority. It also establishes the violence faced by minority communities as the people spitting into the speaker's pram. As a result of the lexical choices, a critical tone was created. The people are also characterized as racist and violent. It also created an unfair setting toward minority communities, which allowed the reader to sympathize with the minority communities. Through the usage of lexical choices, the author was able to highlight how minority communities are viewed as less than human and how the majority uses violence against them because of their race. Next, in the verse, the speaker mentions how our grandparents came here to Britain, and after going there, they were kicked in the teeth and stabbed in the street, as well as their house getting bombed. The line, when our grandparents came to Britain, shows how they are immigrating the country and are foreigners, depicting them as part of the minority community. The lexical choice of our represents the minority community, which in this case are black people. The words kick, stabbed, and bomb creates a semantic field of violence to highlight the violence faced by the minority communities. As a result of the semantic field, a critical tone was created. Added to this, a violent setting was established. The grandparents coming to Britain just to face violence was able to make the reader sympathize with the grandparents. These authorial choices developed the global issue of the violence faced by minority communities seen through the treatment of immigrants, in this case, the grandparents. Moving on to Akala's body of work, it can be seen that Akala uses similar authorial choices to explore the global issue of the violence faced by minority communities. This is seen in Akala's Fire in the Booth Part 3 and Find No Enemy. I will be starting with Fire in the Booth Part 3. In a verse, the speaker states how looking funny when have you ended up in a body bag. The lexical choices of funny represents the minority communities. It is also a rude way to describe minority communities, which establishes the majority's views towards minority groups, which in this case are the black people. The word choice of body bag emphasizes the amount and brutality of the violence that minorities face, as they can end up dead. The minority ending up in a body bag because they look funny creates an unfair, brutal, and violent setting. It also allows the reader to sympathize with the minority as they are described as funny. As a result of these authorial choices, the speaker was able to develop the global issue of the violence faced by minority communities. Next, in his song Find No Enemy, the speaker mentions how he has to keep lying about the history of Africa in order to live with the massacres. The lexical choices of massacres emphasizes the amount and brutality of the violence that minority communities have to face, in this case the black people. The speaker lying about the history of Africa represents the entire community instead of just himself. The speaker having to lie about the history of Africa in order to avoid massacres enables the reader to sympathize with the minority community. It also created a violent and unfair setting where people have to lie about their own race just to avoid violence. Therefore, the speaker was able to highlight the conditions people part of the minority have to live by in order to avoid violence. This shows the violence the minority communities have to face. On the other hand, Mehdi Hassan's Life for British Muslims since 7/7, Abuse, Suspicion, and Constant Apologies details the treatment of Muslims after the incident of 7/7. In his article, Mehdi Hassan details how British Muslims have been spied on, stopped, and have been searched, and are also stripped of their citizenship. The letter S is usually connoted with evil. Through this alliteration, the speaker was able to highlight all the evil that is happening to the minority communities. The words also created a semantic field that all connect with oppressiveness. This shows how the minority is oppressed by the majority. The author also used a syndeton, which shows how the oppression is endless. A critical tone was achieved through the syndeton. The semantic field also created an oppressive and violent setting. It also allowed the reader to sympathize with the Muslims. Therefore, the speaker was able to highlight how minority communities are oppressed by the majority, as seen through Muslim treatment after the incident of 7/7. Added to this, Mehdi Hassan states how that according to the charity Childline, Islamophobic bullying is now rife in our schools. The lexical choice of bullying shows how Muslims have faced both physical and emotional violence in Britain. Islamophobic bullying being rife in schools emphasizes the frequency as well as how common it is for the minority to face violence. Through the lexical choices, the author was able to establish a violent and unfair setting where even kids who are part of the majority use violence against the minority. The reader was also able to sympathize with the Muslims since children are also facing violence solely because they are part of the minority. As a result, the author was able to highlight the ordinary treatment that the minority communities have to face. Moving on to Mehdi Hassan's body of work, Mehdi Hassan explores the global issue of violence faced by minorities through his articles. Muslims and Jews face a common threat from white supremacists. We must fight it together, and Chechnya is trying to exterminate gay people. Our silence only emboldens Vladimir Putin and Ramzan Kadyrov. I'll be starting off with the first article. In his article, Mehdi Hassan states how in the US, hate crime against Jews rose by more than a third and accounted for 58% of all. The author uses statistics in order to show how much violence minority communities face. It also emphasizes the growth of violence against this minority while signifying its growth over the years. Through these statistics, the author was able to establish a violent setting. It also allowed the reader to sympathize with the minority, in this case, the Jewish people in the US. These statistics develop the global issue of violence faced by minority communities. Added to this, in his second article, Mehdi Hassan mentions the words of a detainee. The detainee who was held in prison at Chechnya mentions how they electrocuted the inmates as well as beat them with pipes, kicked them, punched them, and also made their inmates beat them, as well as called them names and spat in their faces. All of these words created a semantic field of violence which shows how much different forms of violence minorities have to face. Furthermore, there are brutal forms of violence such as electrocuting people and uh, as well as less brutal forms of violence such as calling people by their names. This shows how minority communities face all kinds of violence no matter how brutal they are. The semantic field established a brutal and unjust setting where the minority get taken to secret prisons to take all forms of violence. It also enables the reader to sympathize with the gay people as they are treated horribly. These authorial choices help develop the global issue of violence faced by minority communities. In conclusion, the global issue of violence faced by minority communities is conveyed in two texts, the first being Akala's Fire in the Booth Part 1, as well as his body of work which includes Fire in the Booth Part 3 and Find No Enemy. The second text being Mehdi Hassan's article, Life for British Muslims since 7/7, Abuse, Suspicion, and Constant Apologies, and his body of work which includes Muslims and Jews face a common threat from white supremacists. We must fight it together, and Chechnya is trying to exterminate gay people. Our silence only emboldens Vladimir Putin and Ramzan Kadyrov. Both of these texts explore the global issue in a similar way as they both are critical towards the issue which they achieve through authorial choices.